The Running Boy and the Forgotten Cry. Liam's sneakers slapped against the cracked pavement, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he sprinted through the streets. His heart pounded in his chest, but not from exhaustion. Pure urgency fueled his legs. Clutched tightly in his arms was a small, wailing baby, its tiny fists flailing against his chest. Liam barely noticed the dampness of his own shirt, where tears and saliva soaked through. The hospital was only a few blocks away now, just a few more blocks. He ignored the curious stares of pedestrians. Some slowed their steps, craning their necks to get a better look at him. A black boy, barely 10, running full speed with a white infant in his arms. Cars at the intersection honked, but Liam barely noticed. The air was thick with the scent of the city, exhaust fumes from buses, the aroma of freshly baked bread from a corner bakery, and the ever-present undertone of damp concrete. The hospital's bright red emergency sign loomed ahead like a beacon. Liam pushed himself harder, his muscles burning, but he refused to slow down. The baby's cries grew louder. "I have to get there, just a little further." A nurse was exiting the hospital doors just as Liam burst through them. His shoes screeched against the linoleum floor as he skidded to a stop. "Help," he gasped. "Please, help." Heads turned. Conversations halted. A few people gasped. A woman behind the reception desk shot up from her chair, knocking over a cup of coffee. "Oh my God. What happened?" Before Liam could answer, a rush of footsteps filled the space. Several nurses ran forward, their scrubs swishing as they closed in. "Give me the baby," one of them, a short woman with graying hair, ordered gently, her hands reaching out. Liam hesitated. He had carried this baby for what felt like miles. He had listened to every desperate sob, felt the shuddering breaths against his chest. Letting go felt wrong. The nurse noticed his reluctance and softened her expression. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. But let me take over now, okay?" Shaking, Liam nodded and carefully transferred the infant into her arms. The baby hiccuped, its tiny fingers curling into the nurse's sleeve. Another nurse appeared with a warm blanket and wrapped it around the baby before hurrying away down the hallway. Liam swayed slightly, his legs suddenly feeling like jelly. He hadn't realized how tightly he had been holding himself together. "What's your name?" the first nurse asked, crouching down to his level. "Liam," he whispered. Another voice, one filled with authority, cut through the murmuring crowd. "What is going on here?" Liam turned to see an older woman approaching, her white coat pristine, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her name tag read Dr. Margaret Brooks. Something about her presence commanded immediate respect. The moment her eyes landed on the baby, she froze. A single choked sound escaped her lips, and to everyone's shock, the doctor, who had likely seen more emergencies than anyone in the room, fell to her knees. Tears spilled from her eyes as she reached for the infant, her fingers trembling. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God, it's her." The entire room stilled. Nurses exchanged confused glances. Even the receptionist, who had been frantically wiping up spilled coffee, stopped mid-motion. Dr. Brooks let out a quiet sob, pressing a hand over her mouth. "Where did you find her?" She managed, her gaze locking onto Liam with desperate intensity. Liam swallowed hard. "She was alone," he said, his voice small but steady. "In the park. No one else was there. She was crying, and I couldn't just leave her." Dr. Brooks rocked back on her heels, struggling to compose herself. One of the younger doctors knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her back. "Doctor," the younger woman said softly, "who is this baby?" Dr. Brooks looked up, her tear-streaked face full of overwhelming relief. "This is my granddaughter." A ripple of shock passed through the room. "She was taken from our backyard this morning," Dr. Brooks continued, her voice shaking. "Her mother, my daughter-in-law, was just hanging laundry when she turned around and Emma was gone." Liam's stomach twisted. He had found a kidnapped baby. More hospital staff had gathered now, whispering amongst themselves. A security guard entered, his radio crackling as he took in the scene. "We need to call the police," he said. Dr. Brooks nodded absently, still cradling the baby. Her fingers gently traced over the infant's tiny features, as though she still couldn't believe she was real. "You walked all the way here?" one of the nurses asked Liam, studying him with something between admiration and disbelief. Liam nodded. His hands were still shaking. Dr. Brooks finally stood, her strength seeming to return. She turned to Liam, her tear-filled eyes filled with something new now, deep, profound gratitude. "You saved my granddaughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my Emma." Liam's lips parted, but he found himself at a loss for words. One of the nurses handed the doctor a bottle, and she began feeding Emma, rocking her gently. The sight made Liam feel oddly warm inside. He had done that. He had made sure Emma was safe. The police arrived soon after, their expressions serious, as they took in the situation. 2 officers approached Liam. "Son, we need to ask you a few questions." Liam stiffened. The warmth inside him flickered and dimmed. Why did they sound suspicious? The weight of suspicion. The hospital lobby, once filled with the hum of quiet conversations and distant footsteps, had fallen into an eerie silence. All eyes were on Liam as 2 police officers approached. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces unreadable. One was tall with graying hair at his temples, while the other was younger, his face tense with suspicion. Liam's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He'd done the right thing, hadn't he? But now, standing under the cold glare of fluorescent lights, with 2 uniformed officers towering over him, he felt small. The older officer pulled out a notepad. "Son, we need to ask you a few questions," he said, his voice calm but firm. Liam's throat felt dry. He nodded. The younger officer's gaze was sharper, more probing. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Where exactly did you find the baby?" Liam swallowed hard. "In the park, near the swings. She was in a stroller, all alone." The older officer scribbled something down. "What time was this?" Liam hesitated. He hadn't looked at the time. He'd been too focused on getting Emma to safety. Maybe an hour ago. I don't know exactly." The younger officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you didn't see anyone else around?" "No, sir," Liam said quickly. "I looked. I waited for a little while. But no one came." The officers exchanged a glance. The older one remained calm, but the younger officer's skepticism deepened. "You just happened to be in the right place at the right time, huh?" Liam stiffened. There was something in the way the officer said it that made his skin prickle. "I take that path home every day," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "It's a shortcut." The younger officer tapped his pen against the notepad. "And you didn't think to call 911? Liam bit his lip. "I don't have a phone." The officer's eyebrows lifted, and Liam immediately felt self-conscious. He knew kids his age were supposed to have phones, but his mom couldn't afford one. The older officer studied him for a moment, then flipped to a new page in his notepad. "Son, can you tell us exactly how you found the baby? What made you notice her?" Liam nodded quickly. "I heard crying. It was really quiet in the park, which was weird because usually there are a lot of people there. But today, it was empty. When I got closer, I saw the stroller. The baby was crying really hard, and no one was around. I waited for a little bit, but no one came. So I brought her here." The younger officer wrote something down, then looked up. "You waited? How long?" Liam shifted uncomfortably. "A couple of minutes." "A couple?" the officer pressed. "Or longer?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. "It felt like forever." The officer tapped his pen again, then turned to Dr. Brooks, who was still holding baby Emma close to her chest. "Doctor, can we confirm this is your granddaughter?" Dr. Brooks looked up, blinking away fresh tears. "Yes," she whispered. "This is Emma." "We've been searching for her all afternoon." The officer nodded, but kept his gaze on Liam. "And you have no idea how she got there?" "No," Liam said firmly. "I swear." A silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Then the younger officer leaned in slightly. "Son, do you know what happens when people lie to the police?" Liam's stomach twisted into knots. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the way the officer was looking at him, it made him feel like he had. Dr. Brooks suddenly straightened. "That's enough," she said, her voice sharp. "This boy just saved my granddaughter. If he hadn't found her, I don't know what could have happened." The older officer exhaled slowly, then turned back to Liam. "We just need to be thorough, that's all. A missing baby is a serious matter." Liam nodded numbly. The younger officer sighed and stepped back. "For now, we'll need a full statement from you, kid." A nurse approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, officers, but I think we should check the baby first. Make sure she's okay." Dr. Brooks, who had been holding Emma protectively, nodded quickly. "Yes, please. She needs to be examined." The officers exchanged another glance before stepping aside. "We'll be back to follow up," the older one said. As they walked away, the younger officer glanced back at Liam one last time. His eyes were still doubtful. Liam exhaled shakily, his hands clenched into fists. He had saved a baby. He had done the right thing. So why did it feel like he was still being punished? The call home. Liam sat in a plastic chair near the reception desk, his legs bouncing with nervous energy. He knew what was coming next. The hospital staff had already called his mom. She was on her way. His stomach churned. He wasn't scared of her being angry. His mom rarely got mad at him, but she would be worried, and that was worse. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, the glass doors of the hospital slid open, and his mother rushed inside. She was still in her nurse's uniform, her hair pulled back into a bun. Her eyes immediately found him, and the relief on her face was so strong it nearly knocked the air out of him. "Liam," she breathed, rushing over. Before he could say anything, she was kneeling in front of him, checking him over like he was the one who had been lost. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Mom," Liam mumbled. "What happened? Why did I get a call from the hospital saying my son brought in a missing baby?" Liam shifted uncomfortably. "I found her. In the park." His mom's eyes widened, then softened with something like pride. "You brought her here by yourself?" He nodded. "I didn't know what else to do." For a moment, his mom just looked at him. Then she pulled him into a tight hug. "You did good, baby," she murmured into his hair. "You did real good." Liam exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Then she pulled back and cupped his face. "But Liam, what if something had happened to you? What if the person who left her there was still nearby?" Liam looked away. He hadn't thought of that. "I know, Mom," he said quietly, "but she was just a baby. I couldn't leave her." His mother sighed, shaking her head. "You have the biggest heart," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Just then, Dr. Brooks approached. "Mrs. Brown?" she asked softly. Liam's mom turned, her expression guarded. "I just wanted to thank you," Dr. Brooks continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Your son saved my granddaughter. I don't know how to ever repay him." Liam's mother looked at him, then back at the doctor. "He's always been like that. If someone needs help, he doesn't think twice." Dr. Brooks smiled through her tears. "That's a rare quality." Liam shifted, suddenly feeling shy. But then, Dr. Brooks's expression turned serious. "I heard how the officers spoke to him." Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "And I didn't like it." Liam's mother's jaw clenched. "Neither did I." Dr. Brooks exhaled sharply. "I'm going to talk to them. They need to understand that Liam is a hero, not a suspect." Liam's chest tightened. A hero. No one had ever called him that before. His mother took his hand, squeezing it gently. Let's go home, baby." As they walked toward the exit, Liam glanced back at Dr. Brooks. She nodded at him, her expression full of gratitude. Maybe not everyone had seen him as a hero today, but some people had. And that was enough. A hero's burden. Liam sat in the passenger seat of his mother's car, staring out the window at the city lights flickering against the darkening sky. The events of the day replayed in his mind: the crying baby, the long walk to the hospital, the look of suspicion in the officer's eyes. His stomach twisted as he thought about it. He had done the right thing. But why did it feel so heavy? His mother, hands tight on the steering wheel, broke the silence. "Baby, I am so proud of you." Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. "What you did today, taking care of that little girl, making sure she was safe, that was incredible." Liam glanced at her. "Then why do you sound upset?" She sighed, drumming her fingers against the wheel at a red light. "Because, Liam, you saved that baby, and instead of people just seeing that, some of them saw." She hesitated, then sighed again. "Something else." Liam knew what she meant. "They thought I took her," he muttered. His mom tightened her grip on the wheel. "They didn't say it outright," she said carefully, "but I know how they looked at you." Liam felt the words dig into his chest like small stones. He had felt it too. The questions, the doubt, the way the younger officer's eyes had narrowed just a little too much, the way people at the hospital had stared when he walked in. "But Dr. Brooks believed me," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. His mom smiled slightly. "Yes, she did. And she's a good woman for that." She paused. "But baby, not everyone will." Liam shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "But why? I didn't do anything wrong." His mother exhaled, shaking her head. "Because sometimes people don't see what's in your heart. They see what they expect to see." Her voice wavered, but she kept her eyes on the road. "And sometimes that's not fair." Liam stared at his lap. He had always known life wasn't fair, but today had been the first time he felt it so personally. He had saved a life, and people had still looked at him like he was a criminal. As the car turned onto their street, Liam spotted a familiar face sitting on their front steps. Mrs. Jenkins, their elderly neighbor, her small gray cat curled up beside her. She stood when she saw them pull in, worry creasing her face. "Liam, baby, you all right?" she called as his mom parked. Liam climbed out of the car and managed a small smile. "Yeah, Mrs. Jenkins, I'm okay. I saw something on the news, something about a missing baby at the hospital." She studied him carefully. "They said a young boy found her." Liam hesitated. "Yeah, that was me." Mrs. Jenkins' eyes widened, and then she broke into a broad smile. "Well, ain't that something?" She pulled him into a tight hug, patting his back. "You got a heart bigger than this whole neighborhood, child. I'm proud of you." Liam felt warmth spread through his chest. Mrs. Jenkins always had a way of making things feel right again. His mother stepped forward, shaking her head. "He did an amazing thing today." Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "And people treated him wrong for it, didn't they?" Liam's mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "Some of them." Mrs. Jenkins exhaled, shaking her head. "This world, it's always looking at the wrong things." She turned back to Liam. "But don't you ever let that stop you, baby. You did right today, and right always wins in the end." Liam nodded, but he wasn't sure he believed it. The news spreads. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood knew. Liam woke up to the sound of his mom's phone ringing off the hook. She stood in the kitchen, a deep frown on her face as she talked. "Yes, ma'am, I know," she said, rubbing her temples. "No, I don't think we need to make a statement. He's just a kid. He doesn't need that attention." Liam sat at the table, rubbing his eyes. "Who's calling?" His mother sighed. "Reporters." His stomach dropped. "Reporters." She nodded, hanging up the phone before it could ring again. Apparently, Dr. Brooks told some of the nurses what happened. Someone leaked it to the news. Liam groaned, burying his face in his hands. I don't want to be on TV. His mom ruffled his hair. You don't have to be. You're not a story. You're my son. But later that day, when they went to the corner store, Liam realized it was too late for that. People recognized him. That's the boy. Someone whispered. The one who found the baby. He walked her all the way to the hospital. A man in a suit even stopped them outside the store. Son, you're a hero, he said, reaching out to shake Liam's hand. Liam hesitated, but his mom gave him a small nod, so he shook the man's hand quickly. When they got home, his mom turned on the TV. Sure enough, the story was there. Local boy rescues kidnapped and Whale kicks miles to hospital to save here. The news anchor was talking about him. Liam felt weird about it. Part of him was proud. He had helped someone. But another part of him didn't like the attention. He had only done what was right. Why did it feel like the whole world suddenly cared? The invitation. That evening, as Liam was finishing his homework, there was a knock on the door. His mother answered, and to Liam's surprise, Dr. Brooks stood there. Doctor, his mother asked, surprised. Is something wrong? Dr. Brooks smiled warmly. No, not at all. I just wanted to come by in person to say thank you again. Liam peered around the doorway. And to invite you both to dinner this Saturday, Dr. Brooks continued. I'd like you to meet my family. Emma's parents want to thank Liam personally. Liam's mom hesitated. Oh, Dr. Brooks, that's very kind. But, please, Dr. Brooks interrupted gently. Liam did something incredible. My family needs to know the young man who saved Emma's life. Liam looked up at his mom, unsure. She studied Dr. Brooks for a moment, then nodded. All right, we'll come. Dr. Brooks beamed. Wonderful. I'll see you both then. As she left, Liam turned to his mom. Why did she sound like she had to convince you? His mom exhaled, running a hand over his head. Because, baby, not everyone in her house will be as welcoming as she is. Liam frowned. You mean, her son? His mother nodded. Dr. Brooks has a good heart, but I've met men like her son before. She cupped his face gently. Promise me, Liam. If anything makes you uncomfortable, we leave. No questions. Liam nodded slowly. He wasn't sure why his mom seemed so nervous. It was just dinner. Right? A seat at the table. Liam adjusted the stiff collar of his button-up shirt as he and his mother stood in front of Dr. Brooks' house. He had never seen a house so big up close before. It had a brick facade, tall arched windows, and a black iron gate that looked straight out of a movie. The porch lights cast a warm glow over the front steps, but despite the invitation, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. His mother stood beside him, her hand smoothing the wrinkles from her simple but elegant dress. Her face was calm, but Liam could tell she was on edge. She always got like this in places where she wasn't sure how people would treat them. You ready, baby? She asked softly. Liam swallowed and nodded. His mother rang the doorbell. Almost immediately, the heavy wooden door swung open, revealing Dr. Brooks. She wore a deep blue dress, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her eyes warm and welcoming. You came, she said, genuinely delighted. Come in, come in. They stepped inside, and Liam's breath caught. Everything was so shiny. The floors gleamed under a crystal chandelier, and the walls were lined with expensive paintings and family portraits in golden frames. A long hallway stretched toward what smelled like a dining room, the scent of roasted meat and buttered rolls filling the air. Wow, Liam muttered before he could stop himself. Dr. Brooks smiled. Make yourselves at home. As she led them further inside, Liam couldn't help but notice the subtle change in atmosphere. Though Dr. Brooks had been welcoming, the same warmth wasn't in everyone's eyes. A man and a woman sat in the living room, watching them with quiet, careful expressions. The woman, Emma's mother, Sarah, looked genuinely curious, but the man, her husband, James, kept his arms crossed, his eyes unreadable. Liam immediately recognized him from the hospital, the man who had barely looked at him. "This is my son, James, and his wife, Sarah," Dr. Brooks introduced. Sarah stood, shifting Emma in her arms. "It's so nice to meet you both," she said, giving Liam's mother a warm smile. She turned to Liam. "And this little one owes you her life." Liam shuffled awkwardly. I just did what anyone would do." Sarah's smile softened. "No, sweetheart. Not anyone. Most people would have walked away." Liam nodded but didn't say anything. James, still sitting stiffly, finally spoke. "Well, we appreciate it." His voice was polite, but distant. Liam glanced at his mother, who met James's gaze with the same quiet strength she always carried. Dr. Brooks cleared her throat. "Shall we move to the dining room?" A different kind of table. The dining room was massive. A mahogany table stretched across the room, set with delicate china and shining silverware. A grand chandelier hung above them, casting everything in a soft, golden glow. Liam had never seen a dining room like this before. It looked like something out of a magazine. James sat at the head of the table, his wife to his right. Dr. Brooks took her seat across from him, motioning for Liam and his mother to sit beside her. Liam hesitated before pulling out his chair. It was heavy, with tall wooden backing, and it made him feel even smaller. His mother sat beside him, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes scanning the room carefully. She was always good at reading people. As the food was passed around, Liam could feel the weight of James's gaze on him. "So, Liam," James finally said, taking a sip of wine, "you walk through that park often?" Liam nodded. "Every day after school." James hummed. "Interesting." His mother set down her fork. "It's a shortcut. Saves him time." James nodded slowly. "And you were alone when you found Emma?" Liam shifted. "Yes, sir." "You didn't see anyone else? No cars? No people acting strange?" Liam shook his head. "No, just the baby." James leaned back in his chair. "And you just knew to bring her to the hospital?" Liam blinked. Why did that sound like a question? He glanced at his mother, who had gone still. Liam nodded. "Yes, sir." James took another slow sip of his drink. "That's a long way to walk." Liam shifted uncomfortably. I thought it was the safest place to take her." Dr. Brooks, who had been quiet until now, set down her fork with a little more force than necessary. "James." James lifted his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just curious, Mother." Sarah, looking increasingly uncomfortable, turned to Liam. "I think it was incredibly brave of you." Liam nodded but didn't speak, because he understood what James was doing. James wasn't really asking about the baby. He was asking about Liam. He still didn't trust him. Liam felt a tightness in his chest, but his mother's hand lightly squeezed his knee under the table. She was telling him to stay calm. So Liam picked up his fork and forced himself to keep eating. Unspoken tensions. As dinner continued, Dr. Brooks tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, asking Liam about school, telling stories about Emma. But James's eyes never fully lost their guarded expression. Liam felt like a guest in a museum, allowed to be there, but never allowed to feel like he belonged. Finally, his mother placed her napkin on the table and said, "We should probably get going." Dr. Brooks frowned. "Are you sure? We haven't even had dessert." James let out a quiet "Hemph." Liam's mother ignored him. "Thank you for the invitation, Dr. Brooks. We appreciate it," she said smoothly. Dr. Brooks sighed. She knew what was happening. "At least let me walk you out." As they stood, Sarah suddenly spoke up. "Liam," she said, holding Emma a little tighter. "Would you like to hold her?" Liam froze. Sarah smiled warmly. "She's calm now, and I think she'd like to see the boy who kept her safe." Liam's mouth felt dry. I don't know." Sarah stepped forward, gently placing Emma in his arms. Liam barely breathed as he held her. She was warm. So small. So fragile. Emma blinked up at him, her tiny fingers curling in his shirt. In that moment, something inside Liam clicked into place. This was why he had done what he had done. Not for news stories. Not for praise. For her. Dr. Brooks smiled softly at the sight, and even Sarah looked a little misty-eyed. But James' expression was unreadable. Liam carefully handed Emma back and stepped back. "Thank you," he said quietly. Sarah smiled. "No, Liam. Thank you." Dr. Brooks walked them to the door, squeezing Liam's hand one last time. "You are always welcome here," she said warmly. Liam smiled, but as they stepped outside, his mother didn't speak until they were well down the driveway. Then finally she said, "That man didn't want us there." Liam nodded. "But you still deserved to be," she added, squeezing his hand. Liam exhaled. He wasn't sure if James would ever see him differently. But as he thought about Emma's tiny fingers curling around his shirt, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what anyone thought, he had done the right thing. And that was enough. Unfinished conversations and unspoken truths. As Liam and his mother walked down the long driveway of Dr. Brooks' estate, the night air felt cooler, heavier, almost as if it carried the weight of everything left unsaid at that dinner table. The house loomed behind them, warm lights glowing from its grand windows, but the warmth hadn't reached everyone inside. His mother walked in measured, steady strides, her fingers gripping his hand a little tighter than usual. Liam could tell she was still thinking about James. He was too. James had looked at him like a puzzle missing pieces, like something about him didn't quite fit. But Sarah had trusted him. She let him hold Emma. That meant something, didn't it? Liam took a deep breath as they stepped onto the cool pavement of the sidewalk. His mother's voice broke the silence. "He didn't want us there." Liam nodded. He'd felt it too. From the first moment. His mother stopped walking and turned to him, kneeling so they were eye level. "I want you to listen to me, Liam." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You did nothing wrong." "I know," Liam mumbled, kicking a small pebble with his shoe. She tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her gaze. "No, baby. I need you to hear me." She squeezed his shoulders, her dark eyes shining under the glow of a nearby street lamp. "James, men like him, they see the world a certain way. And no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, some people will always doubt you before they know you." Liam swallowed hard. He thought of the police officers at the hospital, the way they had looked at him, the way James had asked those questions, not about the baby, but about him. "Is that why you didn't want to come?" he asked. His mother sighed. "It's why I was prepared for something like this." Liam frowned. "But Dr. Brooks is nice." His mother smiled softly. "She is. And so is Sarah. Not everyone sees the world like James does." She took a deep breath. "But Liam, not everyone will see you the way they see Emma." Liam stiffened. He had known that. Of course he had. But hearing his mother say it out loud, it hurt. Because Emma was just a baby. They had never met before, but he had protected her without question. It hadn't mattered to him that she was white. Why did it matter so much to everyone else? His mother brushed his curls back gently. "Baby, listen. I don't ever want you to stop helping people. That's who you are. That's what makes you special." She smiled. "But you need to be careful. Because sometimes people won't care about your good heart. They'll just see." She hesitated, her voice catching. Liam finished for her. "What they want to see." His mother nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "And you can't control that." Liam let the words sink in. He knew what she meant, and he hated that she had to say it at all. He wanted to argue, to say that the world shouldn't be like that he had done everything right, and it still hadn't been enough to make James see him the way he saw Emma. But deep down, Liam knew it wouldn't change anything. Not tonight. Instead, he took a deep breath and looked back at the house, at the big windows, at the expensive lights glowing behind them. "I still think Emma's lucky to have Sarah as a mom," Liam said quietly. His mother's expression softened. "She is." Liam hesitated. "Do you think James will ever?" His mother shook her head. "I don't know, baby. Some people change. Some don't." Liam thought about the way James had watched him all through dinner. The way his expression had been carefully neutral when Liam held Emma. Had that been doubt? Or had it been something else? Liam wasn't sure. But he knew one thing for certain. He had done the right thing. And no one, not James, not the police, not the whispers in the hospital, could take that away from him. Back home, the knock at the door. When they got back to their apartment, the familiar smell of lemon cleaner and warm laundry greeted them. "Go wash up, baby," his mom said, setting her purse on the table. Liam nodded, heading toward the bathroom. When? Knock, knock, knock. His mother's head snapped up. It was late. Too late for visitors. Liam turned, his stomach twisting. His mother hesitated, then walked cautiously toward the door, glancing through the peephole. Her shoulders tensed. She glanced back at Liam, her expression unreadable, then unlocked the door slowly. It creaked open, revealing a tall figure standing in the dim glow of the hallway light. Liam froze. It was James. A knock in the night. Liam stood frozen near the bathroom door, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. His mother, her hand still on the doorknob, squared her shoulders as she faced James. The hallway light cast long shadows across James' face, making his expression even harder to read. He wasn't in his formal dinner clothes anymore, just a simple black sweater and dark jeans. But somehow he still carried that same tension. Why was he here? "James?" Liam's mother said, her voice calm but cautious. "It's late." James shifted slightly, his jaw tightening. "I know," he admitted, "but I needed to come." Liam could tell his mother was deciding whether to invite him inside or shut the door in his face. Finally, she exhaled and stepped back. "Come in." James hesitated, then stepped into the small apartment. His eyes swept the room, taking in everything. The modest furniture, the framed photos of Liam's childhood, the neatly stacked bills on the counter. It was nothing like his house, and Liam knew he saw that too. James stood stiffly near the door as Liam's mother crossed her arms. "Why are you here?" James shifted, glancing at Liam, then back at her. He cleared his throat like the words were caught there. "I came to apologize." Silence filled the room. Liam blinked. Had he just heard that right? His mother's expression didn't change. For what exactly? James exhaled, running a hand through his short hair. "For dinner." "For?" He hesitated, then sighed. "For how I treated your son." Liam felt something tighten in his chest. James turned toward him. "Liam, I need to say this to you directly." Liam stood taller, waiting. James took a deep breath. "I didn't trust you. When you brought Emma to the hospital, I should have been grateful. But instead He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I let my own biases get in the way." Liam's fingers curled into his sweater. James' words hung in the air like unfinished thoughts. "I was wrong," James finally admitted, his voice raw. "And I see that now." Liam swallowed. Did he, though? Did he really see him now? James shook his head. "You saved my daughter, Liam. I should have thanked you that day. Instead, I questioned you. I doubted you. He exhaled sharply, frustration aimed at himself. "I don't know what to say except, I'm sorry." Liam stared at him, his chest tight. Because the truth was, he didn't know what to say either. A hard conversation. His mother finally spoke. "And what made you change your mind, James?" James turned to her, watching him, he admitted. At dinner, with Emma. The way Sarah trusted him. The way he held her. His voice wavered. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't hesitant. He just cared. Liam shifted under his gaze. James continued. "And then, tonight, I sat in my house and realized." He let out a humorless chuckle. "I teach my daughter to be kind, to see the good in people, but when I had a chance to do the same, I failed." Liam's mother crossed her arms, studying him. "James, do you know how often my son has to prove himself before people see his heart?" James flinched. "I do now." His mother's eyes softened just a little. "And do you realize that if Liam looked different, those officers at the hospital wouldn't have questioned him first?" James' face darkened. "I do now," he admitted, quieter. Liam exhaled slowly. James looked back at him. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't even know if I deserve it." His eyes flickered with something raw, something uncertain. "But I needed to come here and tell you that I see you now, and I see that I was wrong." Liam shifted. He thought about how angry he had felt at dinner, how tired he was of people assuming things about him before they even knew him. But he also thought about Emma, about Sarah, and now, standing in their small apartment, James wasn't looking at him with doubt. He was looking at him with regret. And maybe, just maybe, that meant something. Liam took a deep breath and looked James in the eye. "I didn't do it for you," he said. His voice was steady, but not unkind. "I did it for Emma." James nodded. "I know." Liam glanced at his mom. She studied James for a long moment. Then, finally, she sighed and nodded. "Thank you for coming, James," she said. James' shoulders relaxed just a little. But he didn't stay long. Before he left, he looked at Liam one last time. "You're a good kid, Liam," he said. "A better man than me." And with that, he walked out the door. A new chapter. Later that night, as Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt different. Not because James had apologized, but because Liam had done something right, despite everything. Not because people believed him, not because they rewarded him, but because it was who he was. Liam knew there would be more Jameses in the world, more people who looked at him and saw something he wasn't. But there would also be more Sarahs, more people who would choose to see the truth. And even if the whole world doubted him, he would never doubt himself, because he had saved a life. And no one, not even James, could ever take that away from him. The strength to move forward. The sun peeked through Liam's bedroom window the next morning, casting soft golden rays across the walls. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, still processing everything from the night before. James had apologized. But was an apology enough? His mother's words echoed in his head. "Some people will always doubt you before they know you." But now James knew him, and he had still doubted him first. Liam sighed, sitting up. The air smelled like fresh toast and eggs. His mother was already up, making breakfast. He climbed out of bed, stretching, and shuffled toward the kitchen. His mother stood at the stove, flipping eggs in the frying pan. "Morning, baby," she said without turning around. Liam slid into a chair at the small kitchen table. "Morning." She plated the eggs and toast before sitting across from him. For a moment, she just watched him. "Thinking about last night?" she asked finally. Liam nodded. "I still don't know how to feel." His mother exhaled, spreading butter over her toast. "That's okay. Some things take time to figure out." Liam played with the edge of his napkin. "Do you think James really meant it?" She tilted her head. "What do you think?" Liam hesitated. "I think he felt bad." His mother nodded. "That's a start." "But does feeling bad change anything?" Liam asked. His voice was small. His mother set down her toast. Sometimes, baby, people don't change overnight. But when they see their own mistakes, when they own up to them, it means they're trying. And trying is better than nothing. Liam chewed on his lip. So, I should forgive him. She took a sip of her coffee, studying him. That's not for me to tell you. That's up to you. Liam poked at his eggs with his fork. I don't know if I'm ready. His mother smiled softly. Then don't rush it. A familiar path. Later that afternoon, Liam found himself back in the park. He stood near the swings, the same swings where he had first found Emma. The stroller had been right there. The memory played in his mind as he stared at the empty space, the place where his life had shifted. The park was lively again today. Kids were running around, kicking soccer balls. Parents were chatting on benches. It was so normal, so different from that quiet, eerie day. Liam sat on a bench, watching the leaves rustle in the breeze. After a while, he heard footsteps, soft, hesitant. When he turned, he saw Sarah. She was pushing Emma in a stroller, bundled in a warm sweater despite the afternoon sun. When she saw Liam, she smiled. Hey, she greeted. Mind if I sit? Liam shook his head, scooting over. Sarah sat down, adjusting Emma's blanket. The baby cooed softly, looking up at Liam with curious eyes. Liam waved at her. Hey, Emma. Sarah smiled. She recognizes you. Liam's heart swelled a little at that. For a moment, they just sat there, the distant laughter of children filling the silence. Then Sarah spoke. James told me he came to see you. Liam nodded slowly. He told me what he said. She glanced at him. How do you feel about it? Liam shrugged. I don't know. Sarah sighed. That's fair. Liam glanced at her. Why did he doubt me so much? Sarah hesitated, then exhaled. James grew up with certain ideas that made him assume things before he even had a reason to. She paused. I've been working on getting him to unlearn those things, but it's not easy, and I won't make excuses for him. Liam stared at the ground. I just wanted to help. Sarah nodded. I know, and that's what makes you different. Liam frowned. What do you mean? Sarah gave him a small, sad smile. You didn't hesitate. You saw Emma, and you acted, without thinking about race or class, or what people might assume. You just did what was right. Liam swallowed. Isn't that what people are supposed to do? Sarah chuckled softly. Supposed to? Yes, but not everyone does. Liam let that sink in. After a moment, Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. For what it's worth, I believe in James. I believe he wants to be better. He just needed someone to show him how. Liam looked up. And you think that's me? Sarah smiled. I think you've already started. Emma babbled softly, wiggling her fingers. Liam reached out and let her grab his pinky. Her tiny hand wrapped around his, trusting. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe James had changed, even if just a little. Maybe people just needed proof that the world could be better than they thought. Liam sighed, feeling some of the weight on his heart lift. Tell him. Liam started, then paused. Sarah waited. Liam took a deep breath. Tell him I'm still thinking about it. Sarah nodded. That's fair. And somehow, that felt like enough. A ripple effect. The days passed. James didn't visit again, but he sent a message through Dr. Brooks. A handwritten note. Liam stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, the words were simple. Liam, I still don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll keep working for it. You changed the way I see things. Thank you for that. James. Liam folded the note carefully, tucking it into his drawer. He wasn't sure if he would ever fully forgive James, but he was sure of one thing. James had seen him now, and that was more than enough. Moving forward, a few weeks later, Liam was walking home from school again, the park just ahead. But this time, he wasn't alone. His mom had saved up to get him a phone. "Just in case you ever need help," she had said. "Because next time, Haiti, I don't want you to go through something like that alone." Liam had hugged her tight, blinking back tears. And now, walking through the park, he felt lighter. Not just because of the phone, but because he knew that, no matter what the world thought, he knew who he was. And that was something no one could ever take away. As he reached the swings, he heard laughter. Looking up, he saw Emma. She was in Sarah's arms, giggling. When she spotted Liam, she reached out. Liam smiled. And as he walked toward her, he knew. This was just the beginning. Of something better. Of something new. Of hope.